Prime Minister Mark Carney has touched down in Mumbai for a trade visit that even a year ago would have been unthinkable.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is in India with hopes to bolster trade between the two countries and mend what has been a tense relationship.
Many lessons about how to build infrastructure, how to build out, how to build clean, how to re-green. So I'm going to go through some remarks. I'm going to give a bit of context to how we see the world and what it means for Canada, what it means for Canada-India. But there have been obviously developments today, and I would like to make a few comments.
Breaking tonight. Trump's tariffs may have done something no one in Washington expected. They may have pushed Canada straight into India's arms, and the consequences could reshape global energy for a generation. Pause for a moment and really think about that. For decades, Canada's energy story was simple, almost automatic. Nearly all of its crude oil flowed in one direction, south. Pipelines pointed to one customer. Contracts revolve around one market. Roughly 90% of Canadian crude exports went to the United States. It felt permanent. It felt safe. Until tariffs entered the picture. When new trade pressures began building under President Donald Trump, it wasn't just about steel or aluminium. The message was bigger than that. It was about leverage. It was about power. It was about reminding partners who controlled access to the world's largest consumer market. And in Ottawa, something shifted. Prime Minister Mark Carney looked at the numbers and saw vulnerability. One customer, one direction, one political relationship holding the weight of an entire energy economy. That isn't strength, that's exposure. Now here's where the story turns. Instead of escalating with anger, Canada did something quieter and far more strategic. It started looking east. And waiting on the other side was a country with 1.4 billion people, one of the fastest growing energy appetites in the world, and a leadership team determined never to be overly dependent on any single supplier again. India, led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This wasn't random timing. India had just experienced its own lesson in energy vulnerability. Global tensions, sanctions, shifting alliances. The message was clear. Energy dependence can be weaponized. Supply can become leverage overnight. So when tariffs began reshaping North American trade dynamics, both Ottawa and New Delhi were quietly arriving at the same conclusion at the same time. Diversify, or risk being cornered. Let's talk about scale, because the scale here is almost hard to grasp. India is already one of the largest importers of crude oil in the world. Its demand for natural gas is rising sharply. Its nuclear ambitions are expanding at a pace few countries can match. Energy isn't optional for India, it is survival. It fuels cities, factories, transportation networks, and an emerging middle class that expects reliable power. Canada, meanwhile, sits on vast reserves of crude, enormous natural gas potential, and some of the world's richest uranium deposits. For years, most of that power flowed in one direction. Now the conversation is changing. Imagine the shift emotionally. For decades, Canadian producers didn't need to ask, who else wants our oil? The answer was always the same, the United States. Contracts were predictable, infrastructure was aligned, the system ran on habit. But tariffs disrupt habits. They introduce uncertainty, and markets hate uncertainty. So Canada began accelerating discussions about Pacific export routes. Pipelines aim toward the west coast. LNG terminals designed not for Texas refineries but for Asian ports. The idea wasn't confrontation, it was insurance. And India noticed. Because India doesn't just want energy, it wants reliable partners. Long-term partners. Partners who understand that today's ally can become tomorrow's pressure point if too much power sits on one side of the table. Oil is only the first layer. Natural gas is where the transformation becomes even more dramatic. India is pushing to significantly increase the share of gas in its energy mix over the next decade. That requires massive volumes, stable contracts, long-term confidence. Canada has multiple LNG projects in development. For years, analysts questioned whether there would be enough buyers. Suddenly, one of the world's largest growth markets is paying close attention. And then there's uranium. India operates dozens of nuclear reactors and has plans to expand dramatically in the coming decades. Nuclear energy offers baseload power without the emissions of coal. But reactors require fuel, reliable fuel. Canada is the world's second largest uranium producer. Its reserves are high grade, proven, and politically stable. That combination matters in a world where supply chains are increasingly politicized. So step back and look at the emotional picture. Trump's tariffs were designed to strengthen American leverage. They were meant to protect domestic industries and remind trading partners who sets the tone. But what if the long-term result is not greater control, but diversification away from it? Because here's the uncomfortable reality for Washington. When a supplier sends 90+% of its exports to one buyer, that buyer holds enormous influence. But the moment that supplier begins building alternative relationships, serious ones, that leverage begins to erode. This isn't about hostility, it's about math. If Canada successfully expands exports to India, crude, LNG, uranium, the dependency ratio changes. The balance shifts. Ottawa gains room to breathe. It gains options. And options are power. Now imagine this 10 years from now. Canadian crude flowing directly to Pacific terminals, bound for Indian refineries. Canadian LNG contracts tied into India's long-term energy transition. Uranium supply agreements stretching decades into the future. Engineering partnerships, technology exchanges. That is not a short-term trade adjustment. That is a structural realignment. Of course, none of this happens overnight. Infrastructure takes years. Agreements require negotiation. Political tensions don't vanish with one handshake. But momentum matters. Direction matters. And right now, the direction is east.